She was small, quiet, and walked with her eyes looking down every morning. She carried her broken violin across the dusty streets of the town. The case had holes, and the violin inside had a missing string. But to her, it was more precious than gold. That old violin had belonged to her mother, who died when she was only 6. Since then, she lived with her grandmother in a tiny room behind a bakery. They didn't have much, just enough for one meal a day, but they had love, and they had music. She played on street corners where people walked fast and rarely looked up. Sometimes kind strangers dropped coins into her little box. Sometimes they didn't. Most didn't care. Awesome laughed, calling her music noisy or broken, but she kept playing, because when she played, she didn't feel poor. She didn't feel invisible. She felt free one day. As she watched a group of students walk past in fancy uniforms, she whispered to her grandmother, "I want to go to music school like them." Her grandmother smiled, tired but full of hope. "Then you will one day," she said softly, brushing her hair back. They didn't have the money, and they both knew it. But dreams, her grandmother always said, don't cost anything. For weeks, she saved every coin she earned. She practiced harder. Even when her fingers turned red, she memorized notes from old books she found in the trash behind the school. Finally, she filled out an application to the National Music Academy. She wrote carefully, using her best handwriting. She even recorded herself playing and sent it with the form. Her heart was full of hope, even if her violin had only 3 strings. Her dreams had all 4. Days passed, then weeks. She waited near the mailbox every morning, and then it came. A white envelope with the school's golden logo on the corner. Her hands shook as she opened it, but as her eyes moved across the words, the smile on her face faded. It was a rejection, a cold, printed message. "Thank you for your application, but we regret to inform you." It said she lacked technical skill, had no formal training, and her instrument was unsuitable for professional learning. She read the letter twice, then 3 times. Her chest felt heavy, her eyes blurred. She walked home slowly, the envelope still in her hands. That evening, she sat on her bed, the violin beside her untouched. She didn't cry, not in front of her grandmother. But inside, something broke. "I'm not good enough," she whispered. "They said so." Her grandmother didn't say anything at first. She walked over, picked up the broken violin, and placed it in her granddaughter's lap. "Do you know why birds sing?" she asked. "Because they are happy?" The girl replied softly. "No," said her grandmother, "because it is their way of being heard." She touched her granddaughter's cheek. "You were not made to be silent." That night, the girl didn't sleep. She sat by the window and looked at the stars. The rejection still hurt, but her grandmother's words stayed in her heart. Maybe the music school didn't see her, but someone would. One day she made herself a promise. She would play until the world listened. Next morning, before the sun even rose, she picked up her violin again, the same broken violin, same missing string, but now her hands didn't tremble. Her heart was strong again. She went to the park, stood near the fountain, and began to play. The notes were not perfect, but they were full of emotion, full of life. A few people stopped, then a few more. Some smiled. Some looked surprised. A little boy clapped. An old man gave her a thumbs up. And for the first time in a long time, she saw hope in their eyes. She played every day after that, rain or shine. Some days she earned enough to buy 2 loaves of bread instead of 1. Some days, only a few coins, but no day was wasted. Because every day she played, her music became stronger and deep inside. Something beautiful was growing, not just her talent, but her belief that rejection is not the end. It's just the beginning of a new song, a song only she could write. The harsh letter that changed her life. The letter sat on the small table for 3 days. She couldn't touch it again. Every time her eyes landed on the golden stamp of the National Music Academy, her chest tightened. She remembered the words inside clearly. Insufficient skill, untrained, unsuitable instrument, like sharp pins. Those words kept pricking her mind. Her grandmother tried to lift her spirits, but the girl didn't play her violin anymore. She wrapped it in cloth and placed it under her bed. The room was quieter now. Even the birds outside the window seemed to sing less. The music was gone from her days. She sat near the bakery where her grandmother worked, watching other children pass by. Some held hands with their parents, smiling. Some had instruments polished and new. Her fingers twitched, remembering the way strings felt under them. But shame kept her hands still. Maybe they were right, she whispered to herself. Maybe I'm not meant for music. That night her grandmother came home tired, her apron stained with flour. She noticed the silence. The girl had not spoken all evening. She walked to her and gently said, "Play something for me. Just once." But the girl shook her head. "Why?" the grandmother asked. "They said I can't do it," the girl replied, voice low. "They said I'm not good enough." Her grandmother sat beside her and said nothing for a while. Then she opened an old wooden box. Inside was a photograph, faded but clear. "This was your mother," she said, "playing that same violin in the garden. She never learned from a school, but she played like her soul was speaking." The girl looked at the photo, her eyes wide. "I didn't know she played." "Yes," said the grandmother, "and just like you." People told her she wasn't good enough, but she didn't stop. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes. "But I failed," she said. "No," her grandmother replied, "you were rejected by a paper, not by music." The next morning, the girl did something she hadn't done in days. She pulled the violin out from under the bed. She dusted it off, tuned it as best she could, and walked to the park. She stood near the fountain again. The crowd was smaller. That day, just a few old men playing cards, a woman feeding birds, 2 children chasing each other. She closed her eyes and lifted the bow. The first note was shaky, the second note stronger, by the third note. Her fingers moved with purpose. The broken strings still hummed oddly. But her heart was full, and that made all the difference. A man walking his dog paused, listening. He tossed a coin into her case. Then another. Soon, a small group formed. No one said a word, they just listened, and when she finished, quiet applause rose from the small crowd. A woman approached and said, "That was beautiful. Do you perform often?" The girl smiled shyly and said, "I'm just trying again." That evening, as the sun dipped low, she returned home and placed a few coins on the table. "From your music." Her grandmother asked. She nodded. The grandmother said nothing, just hugged her tightly. They didn't need words anymore that night. Something changed inside the girl. She took the rejection letter, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the old wooden box with her mother's photo, not as a wound, but as a reminder. A reminder that dreams don't belong only to the chosen. They belong to the ones who refuse to give up. The next morning, she woke early, picked up her violin and whispered, "You and I will try again." And they did. Every single day, with every single note. She rewrote her story, not on paper. Through sound, she didn't need their approval anymore, because her music had already found its way into the hearts of strangers, and that was more powerful than any certificate. The park concert nobody expected. The sun was warm that Sunday. Birds flew in slow circles above the trees. The park was busier than usual, filled with families, couples, and tired workers trying to rest on her usual corner near the fountain. The girl set her violin case down. She tuned the strings carefully, brushing her fingers across the wood with quiet respect. The broken strings still buzzed softly, but it was part of her now, just like her story. Around and began to play. The melody was not something she had learned from a book. It came from her heart. It spoke of hunger, hope, and the sound of her mother's voice singing in the kitchen long ago. One note after another, she filled the space around her with music. A young man carrying a drum passed by. He stopped, listened, and slowly pulled his small hand drum from his bag. He sat down nearby and joined in, matching her rhythm with gentle beats. The sound echoed through the trees. Something magical had begun minutes later. Another man with a saxophone appeared. He watched for a while, then nodded and added a smooth line over her notes. People walking by turned their heads. Some stopped, curious. Some took out their phones. Some smiled, amazed that this group of strangers was creating something beautiful together. Children danced barefoot in front of them, laughing. Old men leaned back on benches, eyes closed for the first time. She wasn't just a girl with a broken violin. She was a part of music, alive, growing, unexpected.
Ow.
A woman in a long coat stood. At the edge of the crowd, she held a camera, filming quietly, her face calm and serious. She didn't clap, didn't cheer, just recorded. Then walked away. The girl didn't notice her. She only noticed the applause when the song ended, the loudest applause she had ever heard in her life. The drummer grinned. "That was amazing," he said. She smiled and nodded. "Thank you." They didn't know each other's names, but in that moment, they were a team, and the people wanted more. So they played again and again for nearly an hour. They filled the park with music that came from nothing but feeling. No stage, no microphones, no tickets, just soul. When it was time to leave, the girl opened her case to find more coins than ever before, even a few small bills, but more than that. People came up to her with kind words. "You're gifted. You made my day. Don't stop." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She only whispered to herself, "Maybe this is school enough." That night, back home, her grandmother made hot soup and gave her a tight hug. She listened as the girl told her every detail: the crowd, the music, the strangers, the applause. When she finished, her grandmother touched her shoulder and said, "Some people learn from books, some learn from life. You're learning from both." 3 days later, something surprising happened. A neighbor boy ran up to her with wide eyes. "You're on the internet." He shouted. She didn't understand. He showed her a video on his phone. It was her, playing in the park, the drummer beside her, the saxophone man in the background. Thousands of views. Comments like, "Who is this girl? This is real music." I cried watching this. She felt like the ground shifted under her feet. For the first time, people far away were listening to her music. They didn't see the broken violin. They didn't see the rejection letter. They only heard what her heart was saying. Her grandmother smiled when she saw it, you see. She said, "I told you someone would hear you." The girl held the violin close and whispered, "I think the world just heard its first note." From rejection to a rising star, the next morning felt different. The air was crisp, but her steps were light. She walked to the same park, holding her violin close. Now people smiled when they saw her. Some waved, others whispered, "That's her." The girl with the broken violin had become a name in the wind. She took her spot near the fountain. The drummer was already waiting with a grin. "Looks like you're famous now," he said. She smiled shyly, not used to attention. Then, without words, they began to play. More people gathered this time. Some came early just to hear her. Even the street vendors paused their work to listen. Every note she played carried something powerful. It was like her soul was telling a story only music could explain. By the end of the performance, the crowd clapped loudly. Even strangers handed her thank you notes, but she had no idea that someone important had returned. The woman in the long coat, the one who had recorded her days ago, was back. She waited until the music stopped, then walked forward. "Excuse me?" The woman said gently, "I'm with the City Culture Journal. May I speak with you?" The girl froze for a second, then nodded. They sat on a nearby bench, and the woman began asking questions. Where did she learn to play? Who taught her? Why did she choose that park? The girl answered with honesty, never trying to sound smart. She said her heart was her teacher, and her violin was her friend. The next day, an article came out with her picture on the front page. The headline read, "Street musician touches thousands. A star is born." The bakery owner waved the paper outside his shop, proudly shouting, "She's from this street. She's one of us." People came to the park not just to hear her, but to meet her. She didn't change, though. She still wore the same shoes with worn-out soles. She still used the broken violin with the missing string. She still played the same tune. Her mother once hummed in the kitchen. Then, one evening, as she was packing up to leave, a man approached her. He wore a black suit, with a silver pin on his collar. "Good evening," he said kindly. "I work with the Royal Cultural Foundation." She blinked, unsure if she heard right. "I was shown your video," he continued. "The Queen's cultural team is organizing a charity event, and we would like you to perform." She stood there, shocked, her mouth open slightly, but no words came out. Would that be something you'd be interested in? He asked. She finally nodded. Yes, she whispered, almost in disbelief. He handed her a card with his name and number. You'll be the closing act, he said, smiling. Then he turned and walked away. That night she ran home, her heart racing. She burst through the door, shouting, "Grandma, Grandma, you want me to play at a royal event?" Her grandmother looked up, tears already forming. She hugged her tightly and said, "See? I told you, baby bird, someone would hear your song." The next few days were a whirlwind. She was given a new dress to wear, simple but elegant. Her broken violin was cleaned and polished, though she refused to replace it. "It's a part of my journey," she said. She practiced every hour, barely sleeping. But she didn't feel tired. She felt alive. Finally, the day came. She arrived at the grand hall, her hands trembling slightly. The walls sparkled with gold and lights. Famous musicians, artists, and royals filled the seats. She peeked from behind the curtain and whispered to herself, "You belong here, just like them." When her turn came, she walked slowly to the stage. People whispered, surprised to see someone so young with such a simple violin. But when she played, everything changed. The hall went silent. Each note danced. In the air, it wasn't just sound, it was emotion, truth, and love by the time she finished. The silence turned into thunderous applause. Even the queen rose from her seat and clapped. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not from nerves, but from joy. She had once been told she was not good enough. Now she had just played for royalty. The letter came on a quiet morning. She was packing up her violin after another long night of practice in the park. Cold wind brushed her cheeks. But her heart was warm with hope. She didn't expect anything big. Not anymore. But when the man from the music academy walked toward her with a soft smile and an envelope, something felt different. "You've been noticed," he said gently. Handing her the letter, she took it with shaking hands. Her fingers cold and rough from years of street performances. When she opened the envelope and read the words, her breath caught in her throat. She had been invited to audition for a royal event. It's not just any concert, but the concert, the kind of event where the queen might sit in the front row, where famous musicians from across the galaxy would perform. She stared at the letter, then at the man, then back at the letter. "Is this real?" she whispered. He nodded and said, "You earned it." That night, she couldn't sleep. Even after years of hoping, dreaming, and praying, this still felt like a dream. The man returned the next day with something wrapped in velvet. He handed it to her with both hands, as if he was holding something sacred. When she unwrapped it, she gasped. It was a violin, brand new, polished, perfect. Her hands trembled as she held it. She had never touched anything so fine before. The strings were soft, the wood smooth like glass. She held it to her chest and closed her eyes, whispering a thank you only the wind could hear. The next 7 days were the hardest of her life. She practiced from sunrise to midnight, sleeping only 3 hours a night. Her fingers bled from pressing the strings too hard, but she didn't stop. Her grandmother watched from the corner of the room, always quiet, always smiling. She made tea when her granddaughter's head hung low in exhaustion. She whispered small words of encouragement. "One more time, you're almost there. They'll hear you." The day of the audition arrived like a thunderstorm, fast and full of energy. The hall was bigger than anything she had ever seen. Golden walls, crystal lights, long red carpets, everything sparkled. She stood in the waiting room with other musicians, all dressed in fine clothes, holding expensive instruments. She wore a simple dress, the one her grandmother had sewn years ago for a church performance. It didn't shine, but it was clean. Her shoes were old, but they carried her forward with strength when her name was called. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break her ribs. She walked onto the stage slowly, each step feeling heavy. The room was quiet, full of powerful people sitting tall and serious. Men and women in suits, polished shoes, sharp eyes. They looked at her with curiosity, some with kindness, some with doubt. She stood in the center, took a deep breath, and raised her violin. For a moment, her hands shook, but then she remembered the streets, the cold nights, her grandmother's voice. Her heart grew still. She placed the bow on the strings and began to play the same tune she had played under the city lights, the same tune that made children dance and old men weep, the same tune that once brought her enough coins to buy dinner. But this time, it filled the golden hall with magic. Each note was clear, full of life and pain and beauty. She didn't try to impress them, she just told her story through sound. When the last note faded, silence filled the room. No one moved. No one whispered, not even a cough. She lowered her violin, heart racing. Hands still trembling, then someone clapped, and another. And then the entire room stood up and applauded. The sound of their hands echoed through the hall, loud and powerful. Tears filled her eyes. But she blinked them away. She looked toward the back of the room and saw the director nodding slowly. His eyes full of pride, she walked off the stage in a daze. Like she was floating behind the curtain, she clutched her violin and cried quietly. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were the tears of someone who had waited too long to be heard. People passed by and whispered, "Amazing. So much emotion? She's different." Back at home, her grandmother was waiting with a warm blanket and a hot bowl of soup. When she told her the news, the old woman smiled and whispered, "I told you they'd hear you someday." They hugged for a long time, saying nothing more. In that quiet moment, it didn't matter how rich or powerful the audience was. What mattered was that a girl who once played on the sidewalk was now being called a star. And yet she knew this was only the beginning. The music had opened the door, but her heart, her story, and her truth had stepped inside. And they were ready to play. Louder than ever before, the house felt quiet, too quiet after the big audition. Everything seemed to change, but something felt missing. She came home holding the official letter in her hand. The royal director had sent it just a day after her performance. An invitation to perform at the grandest event of the year. She should have been dancing with joy, but her heart was heavy. Her grandmother had not come out of her room that morning. Usually she was up early, making tea, humming a soft tune. But today, the door was half closed, and the room was dark. She stepped inside and found her grandmother lying still in bed. Eyes open but tired, face pale but smiling. "Guess what?" she said, trying to sound cheerful. "They want me to perform at the royal gala." The old woman looked at her, eyes soft and full of pride. A faint smile crossed her lips. "Told you they'd hear you someday." Her voice was thin, barely louder than a whisper. She reached out and held her granddaughter's hand, fingers cold and weak. "Now go and play for the world," she said. That night, the girl sat beside her grandmother until she fell asleep. But when the sun rose, the old woman didn't wake up. She had passed peacefully, just like she had lived quietly. With grace, the girl didn't cry right away. She just sat there, holding her grandmother's hand. It didn't feel real, not yet. The only sound in the room was the wind outside. The window and the ticking clock, her biggest supporter, her first audience, was gone. The funeral was simple, just like her grandmother would have wanted. Family, neighbors, and even a few strangers came. Some brought flowers, others brought quiet hugs. The girl stood beside the grave, holding her violin close. When everyone had gone, she stayed behind. Then she played. She played the song her grandmother loved most, the one they listened to during storms, the one she played on the streets when they had nothing. Each note was a goodbye. Each string a tear she couldn't cry, and as she played, a soft breeze blew across the cemetery. It felt like her grandmother was there, sitting in her usual chair, nodding slowly. Days passed slowly. The house felt empty without the sound of her grandmother's voice. She would sometimes turn to say something, then remember she was alone. But she kept practicing, not because someone told her to, but because it was the only way she could breathe. Then came another letter. This time, it wasn't just an invitation, it was official. The royal palace confirmed her place in the upcoming performance. She was to play in front of the queen, top diplomats, royal families, and international musicians. They even offered to cover her travel, dress, and living costs. They called it an honor for the country, but to her, it felt like a gift for her grandmother. She stared at the empty chair where her grandmother once sat. She remembered the nights they sat by candlelight, her grandmother sewing patches on her dress while she practiced broken notes. She remembered the tired eyes that never stopped believing, and now her heart burned with one quiet promise: I will play for you. She whispered to the empty chair, every note is for you. She packed her things carefully, folding her grandmother's scarf and placing it inside her violin case. She didn't want fancy things, not even the royal gowns they offered. She wanted to carry her grandmother's memory with her, the one who gave her strength when she had none, the one who clapped the loudest when no one else listened. On the train ride to the capital, she looked out the window in silence. Other passengers chatted, laughed, took pictures, but she sat still, holding her violin, her eyes tracing the clouds in her mind. She saw her grandmother smiling, whispering, "Don't be afraid." And she wasn't, not anymore. The royal director met her at the gates of the palace. "You'll play second to last," he said, right before the queen's address. That meant she wasn't just part of the show. He smiled and added, "You earned this. All of it." She looked around the royal hall during rehearsals, so big, so bright. But all she could think about was that old chair by the window, the chair that would always be empty now, and yet not empty at all, because every time she played, her grandmother was still listening. This was not just a performance, it was a promise kept, tribute played with trembling hands, but an unshakable heart. And no matter how grand the audience, she knew one listener would always hear her louder than the rest, her grandmother, the one who believed before anyone else did, and who, even now, would be clapping from the stars just beyond the lights. The day had come. The royal hall stood tall and glowing like something from a dream. Its golden walls sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Guards in silver armor stood by the doors, silent and still inside. Important guests filled every seat: diplomats, musicians, nobles, and even foreign ambassadors at the very front. Seated under a delicate blue banner was the queen herself backstage. She stood in front of a mirror, holding her violin close to her chest. She wore a soft blue gown gifted by the palace, smooth as silk, light as air. But around her wrist was the old bracelet her grandmother had given her, the one made from string and beads. The contrast made her smile, royal beauty and humble beginnings, together in one image. A helper knocked gently on the door and said, "You're next." Her heart beat faster, but not out of fear. She wasn't nervous like before. She was ready. She stepped onto the stage slowly, the spotlight following her every step. Her eyes scanned the room, but she didn't look for the rich or powerful. She imagined her grandmother sitting in the back, in a simple chair, smiling proudly. That image gave her peace. The queen watched her closely, not with coldness or judgment, but with quiet curiosity. She had likely seen many artists in her life, but something about this girl from the streets, seemed different. She lifted the violin to her chin. The hall went silent, no movement, no whispers, just the soft sound of her breath. Then she began to play. It wasn't a song written for royalty. It wasn't something found in books or taught in fancy schools. It was a song she had made herself, made from memories, from hard days and long nights, from hunger, from hope, from her grandmother's voice. Note floated through the air like a whisper from the past. The music told a story of a girl with nothing but a broken violin, of coins dropped into a cup by strangers, of rejection, from a music school, of warm tea served by an old woman on cold nights, and of a moment when everything finally changed. The room stayed completely still. People forgot to blink, forgot to breathe. Some had tears in their eyes without even knowing why. Even the queen sat up straighter, her hands resting gently on her lap. As the final note faded, silence returned. But it wasn't an awkward silence. It was heavy, full of feeling. Then suddenly, applause erupted like thunder. The queen stood up, leading the room in a standing ovation. She clapped slowly, but her eyes were shining. That moment, that sound, it was the highest honor anyone could receive. The girl stood there, stunned, tears filling her eyes. She lowered her violin and gave a small bow. As she walked off the stage, people reached out to shake her hand. Some whispered, "Thank you." Others just smiled. Too touched to speak backstage, the royal director was waiting with a wide grin. "You moved them," he said. You moved. He handed her another letter, this one sealed with the royal crest. Inside was an offerful sponsorship to study music at any academy in the world. Paid tuition, housing, travel, everything taken care of. She stared at the letter for a long time. This was what most musicians could only dream of. She could train with the best, live in cities filled with music and art. But then she looked up and quietly said, I already had my teacher. The director blinked, surprised. Who? She smiled softly. Her name was Grandma. He didn't press her, just nodded slowly. He could see that this offer, while big, wasn't what truly mattered to her. Later that night, when the event ended and guests began to leave, the Queen herself asked to see the girl. She was led into a quiet room where the Queen stood by a window. Your music, the Queen said gently, felt like a story I knew but had forgotten. The girl bowed. Thank you, Your Majesty. The Queen looked at her kindly. What will you do now? She held her violin tighter and answered, I'll keep playing and I'll teach others. Just like I was taught, the Queen smiled. Then the world is lucky to have you. When the girl left the palace that night, the stars were shining. Above the city, she walked slowly, letting the cold air touch her face. She wasn't just a musician now. She was a storyteller, a bridge between worlds. And her story wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. Because music fit for a queen was not about fancy notes or perfect posture. It was about truth and heart and remembering where you came from, and no matter how far she traveled. She would always carry that music within her, forever and always. It would be hers and her grandmother's song. Years passed, but the music never stopped. The girl who once played on street corners now stood on stages around the world. Royal halls, peace concerts, cultural festivals, she was everywhere. People didn't just come to hear her music, they came to feel something real, something deep. She had become a symbol, not just of talent, but of hope. Her face appeared on magazine covers, posters, and music awards. But when people asked her how she reached so far, she would always smile and say, My degree is made of hope, pain, and practice. She never forgot where she came from. Not for a single moment. She remembered the cold nights, the broken violin, the hunger in her belly. She remembered her grandmother's warm hands and the little chair by the window. And because of that memory, she decided to do something important. She returned to her hometown quietly one day. There were no cameras, no guards, just her and her violin. She walked to the park where she used to play. The same old bench was still there, worn and faded. She sat down and let the notes float into the sky once more, but this time she came with more than just music. She had a plan, a dream she had carried in her heart since the day her grandmother passed. She opened a free music program for children right there in the same neighborhood. No rich walls, no gold curtains, just a warm room. A room filled with instruments, books, and belief. Every child was welcome. It didn't matter if they had money, nice clothes, or famous last names. If they had a dream, they had a place. Each child received an instrument. Some got violins, others drums, some flutes. They were told, You can learn too. She hired local teachers, many of whom had struggled like she once did. Some were street performers, some were retired musicians. Together, they created something powerful, a space full of music and second chances. Laughter, mistakes, claps, and tears echoed through the halls every day. The children didn't just learn notes, they learned how to believe in themselves. Soon, people from other cities heard about it. Musicians came to volunteer, donors sent money and instruments. It became more than a school, it became a home, a place where broken dreams were repaired and new ones were born. One morning a letter arrived, sealed in silver. It was from the same music school that had once rejected her. They wanted her to return not as a student, but as a masterclass teacher. The same director who had doubted her now called her a living inspiration. She didn't laugh. She didn't feel revenge. She just nodded quietly, then packed her things. But she didn't go alone. She brought 10 students from her music center, children who had never left town before. Children whose eyes lit up at the sight of big buildings and shiny doors. When she walked into the academy, she wore a simple outfit, no diamonds, no titles, just her violin and her heart. She stood in front of the room and told her story. To show off, but to show what was possible. Then she let the children perform. Their songs were not perfect, but they were real. And real music always touches deeper. The applause was long. Even the strictest teachers stood up and clapped. One of them whispered, "We almost missed her." But they didn't miss her now. Despite her success, she still played in the park every Sunday. People would walk by, stop, and realize who she was. Some stayed to listen, others simply nodded with respect. One little girl once dropped a flower in her violin case and said, "Your music makes the sky prettier." She kept the flower in a book beside her bed, 'cause for her, these were the real treasures. Not gold, not awards, not invitations from kings and queens, but words from strangers who felt seen through. Her sound, she didn't need fame to feel proud. She only needed to remember that little girl with the broken violin, the one who played in the cold, dreaming of something more, and now, that dream had grown into a symphony of hope, of healing, of second chances.
Oh.
And every time she played, even now, on big stages or under quiet trees, she played for the one still waiting to be heard, for the child watching from behind a window, for the grandmother in a small room, whispering, "Keep going." Her story became more than just hers. It became a song that others could sing to. And that's how she knew her music would never fade, because it didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed, even when no one else did. Ask ChatGPT.